The galaxy was burning. High Speaker Velis stood alone in the great chamber of the Galactic Council. The room that once held representatives from 1,000 worlds now echoed with emptiness. Most of the seats were dark. Their owners were dead, their planets consumed, their species erased from existence. Velis was old. His pale blue skin had grown thin with age, and his 4 eyes carried the weight of centuries. He had led the council through times of peace and small conflicts. But nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing could have prepared anyone for the Hallowed. They came from the dark spaces between galaxies. No one knew their origin. No one knew their purpose beyond consumption. They moved like a wave of death across the stars, and everything they touched became nothing. The Valoran Dominion had been the first major power to fall. Empress Letha had sent desperate messages as her fleet crumbled. 17 billion Valorans died in 3 days. The Pallid Confederation sent their greatest warships to help. The Hallowed tore them apart like they were made of paper. Now the swarm moved toward the core worlds. The Council's combined military was shattered. Refugee ships filled every safe system, carrying survivors who had nowhere left to go. The end was coming, and Velis could see it clearly. He walked slowly to the communication terminal at the center of the chamber. His thin fingers trembled as he accessed a file that had been sealed for over 200 years. The file contained coordinates to a single star system at the edge of the galaxy, a system under permanent quarantine, the Sol system, Earth. Velis remembered the debates when the Council first discovered humans. Scout ships had observed the blue planet from a safe distance. What they found terrified the Council more than any enemy they had ever faced. Earth was a Class 12 death world, the highest rating possible. Its gravity crushed bones, its weather spawned storms that could destroy cities. Its oceans held predators with hundreds of teeth. Its land crawled with venomous creatures, deadly plants, and diseases that mutated faster than any medicine could cure. And somehow, impossibly, intelligent life had evolved there. The humans were nightmares given form. They breathed an atmosphere mixed with a gas that caused fire. Their bodies ran so hot that Council species would suffer burns from touching them. They consumed the flesh of other creatures. They produced a compound called adrenaline that made them faster, stronger, and more dangerous when threatened. Evolution on their world was not about cooperation. It was about survival against constant death. The Council voted unanimously to quarantine Earth. They built warning beacons around the Sol system. They made contact with humanity a crime punishable by exile. They hoped the humans would never develop faster than light travel. They prayed the Deathworlders would stay contained. But now Velis was about to break the oldest law of the galaxy. He was about to call the monsters for help. His fingers entered the command. The signal shot across space toward the quarantine zone, toward Earth. Velis closed his eyes and whispered a prayer to gods he barely believed in anymore. 12 days later, the signal reached the flagship Everest. Admiral Kang Tae was reviewing fleet reports when the message arrived. He was a tall man with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen both war and peace. He had commanded the United Earth Fleet for 15 years, protecting humanity's expansion across their own solar system. The message was crude, translated poorly through systems that had never been designed to communicate with humanity. But the meaning was clear. Billions were dying. Entire species faced extinction. The galaxy needed help. Tae read the message 3 times. Then he called an emergency meeting of the United Earth Council. The debate lasted for 2 days. Some argued that humanity owed the galaxy nothing. The Council had caged them. They had placed beacons around the Sol system, warning other species to stay away. They had treated humans like dangerous animals. Why should humanity bleed for those who had rejected them? Others argued differently. They spoke of duty. They spoke of what it meant to be human. Yes, the galaxy had feared them. But did that mean humanity should let billions die when they had the power to help? Admiral Tay listened to every argument. When the debate finally quieted, he stood to speak. His voice was calm but carried the weight of a decision that would change everything. Humanity had always been survivors, he said. They had survived ice ages and plagues. They had survived wars and disasters. They had climbed out of caves and reached for the stars. But survival alone was not enough. What made humans special was not just their ability to endure. It was their ability to choose who they wanted to be. The galaxy saw them as monsters. This was their chance to show them something different. This was their chance to prove that the creatures from the death world could also be protectors. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Humanity would respond to the SOS. The Deathworlder fleet assembled in orbit around Earth. 300 warships, built with the brutal efficiency that characterized everything humans created. These were not elegant vessels designed for comfort. They were weapons wrapped in metal, carrying crews who had evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day. Admiral Tay stood on the bridge of the Everest and looked at the planet below. Blue oceans, green continents, the most dangerous world in the known galaxy. His home. Captain Yoon Hana commanded the Iron Willow, a heavy battleship with scars from a dozen engagements. She was young for a captain, but her crew would follow her into any fire. Lieutenant Park Day served as tactical officer aboard the Everest. His mind processed battle scenarios faster than most computers. He had not slept more than 4 hours at a time since the message arrived. Sergeant Bae Sora led the ground forces aboard the carrier Indomitable. Her soldiers were the hardest humans alive, trained to fight in any environment, any gravity, any atmosphere. Dr. Shin Mina ran the medical bay on the Everest. She had soft eyes and gentle hands, but she had also performed surgery during hull breaches and treated wounds that would make other species faint. These were the Deathworlders, the monsters the galaxy had tried to contain. The fleet powered up their engines. The quarantine beacons detected the movement and sent automatic warnings. Tay ignored them. The Everest led the way. 300 ships followed. They crossed the invisible line that had separated humanity from the galaxy for 2 centuries. For the first time in history, the Deathworlders were leaving their cage, and the universe would never be the same. The Deathworlder fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at Pallid Station 9. What they found was a graveyard. Thousands of ships floated in the darkness. Some were military vessels with their hulls torn open. Others were civilian transports packed with refugees who had nowhere left to run. Power was failing across the station. Emergency lights blinked in patterns of desperation, and circling above it all, moving like sharks around bleeding prey, were the hollowed drones. Admiral Kang Tae studied the tactical display. The drones were smaller than he expected, each one about the size of a human fighter craft. But there were hundreds of them, and more were arriving every minute. They had not yet attacked the disabled refugee ships. They were waiting. Gathering. Commander Torek of the Pallid Confederation hailed the human fleet from his crippled cruiser. His voice shook as he spoke. The translator software struggled with his language, but his fear needed no translation. He warned the humans to hold position. He told them to wait for reinforcements that would never come. He begged them not to engage an enemy they did not understand. Captain Yoon Hana listened to the warning from the bridge of the Iron Willow. Then she turned to her crew and gave a single order. All ahead, full. The Iron Willow surged forward, straight into the swarm. Commander Torek watched in disbelief. No species engaged the Hollowed directly. Every military doctrine in the galaxy emphasized distance, caution, strategic withdrawal. The Pallid had spent centuries developing tactics based on avoiding close combat. The humans apparently had not received that information. The Iron Willow's weapons opened fire before the drones could react. Lieutenant Park Day had calculated firing solutions during the approach, predicting enemy movement patterns based on the few seconds of observation data he had. His predictions were not perfect. They were close enough. Drones exploded in chains of fire. The swarm scattered, confused by prey that attacked instead of fled. But the Hollowed adapted quickly. They always did. Dozens of drones converged on the Iron Willow, slamming into its hull, cutting through metal with appendages that seemed to be made of living darkness. Captain Hana did not retreat. She ordered her ship to roll, scraping drones off against the debris of destroyed vessels. When that failed to remove all of them, she vented specific compartments into space, blowing the attackers off with explosive decompression. One drone managed to breach the lower decks. It carved through a bulkhead and entered the ship, a nightmare of black limbs and hungry mouths. Sergeant Bay Sora was waiting for it. She had transferred to the Iron Willow when the battle began, bringing a squad of her best soldiers. They wore standard combat armor, nothing like the environmental suits other species required. They carried ballistic weapons, projectile launchers that most galactic militaries considered primitive. The drone was fast. It had killed thousands of soldiers across dozens of species. It expected the same easy slaughter here. Sora shot it 6 times before it crossed half the corridor. When it kept coming, she dropped her weapon and met it with her hands. The fight lasted 90 seconds. The drone's limbs cut through her armor, drew blood, cracked bones. Sora ignored the pain. Her squad surrounded the creature, striking weak points, holding limbs, refusing to give ground. When it was over, the drone lay in pieces on the deck. Sora stood above it, breathing hard, blood running down her arms. She looked at her soldiers and nodded once, then she asked if there were any more. Commander Torek watched the battle through the sensors of his dying ship. He had commanded Pallid forces for 30 years. He had never seen anything like this. The humans did not fight like any species he knew. They did not maintain safe distances. They did not prioritize self-preservation. They ran toward the enemy. They took wounds that would kill a Pallid and kept fighting. They worked together with a coordination that seemed almost telepathic. And they won. The Iron Willow and the rest of the Deathworlder fleet cleared the swarm from Pallid Station 9 in less than 2 hours. The drones that survived fled into deep space, carrying information about the new threat back to the hollowed hive mind. After the battle, medical teams from the human fleet boarded the refugee ships. Dr. Shin Mina led the effort personally. The Valoran survivors had never seen a human before. When Mina entered their ship, they pressed themselves against the walls, trembling with fear. She was tall by their standards. Her body radiated heat that they could feel from meters away. Her heart beat with a loud, steady rhythm that sounded like a war drum. She was a Deathworlder, a creature from their worst nightmares. Mina moved slowly. She spoke softly, even though the translator made her words sound harsh. She knelt beside a wounded Valoran child, a small being with silver skin and 3 eyes clouded with pain. The child's arm was broken, twisted at an angle that made even Mina wince. The child's mother tried to pull her away, certain that the monster would hurt her. Mina did not react to the fear. She simply opened her medical kit and got to work. She set the bone with gentle precision. She applied healing compounds designed for non-human biology. She wrapped the arm in a soft cast and gave the child something for the pain. Through it all, she hummed a quiet song from Earth, something her own mother had sung to her when she was small. When she finished, the child looked up at her with wonder instead of fear. Mina smiled and moved to the next patient. She worked through the night. Other human doctors joined her, spreading across the refugee fleet, treating wounds, stabilizing critical cases, saving lives. By the time the station's artificial sun rose again, they had treated over 2,000 patients. The refugees began to whisper a word that their translators struggled to express. The closest meaning in human language was something like protector or guardian. But the Valorans meant something more. They meant savior. Admiral Tay established contact with High Speaker Velis through a holographic communication link. The old leader of the Galactic Council appeared small and fragile on the screen. His 4 eyes could not meet Tay's gaze for more than a moment. The presence of a Deathworlder, even through a hologram, triggered instincts that Velis could not control. Tay noticed the fear. He had seen it in every alien face since the fleet arrived. He did not take offense. He understood what humanity represented to these beings. He kept his voice calm and asked only one question. Where was the heart of the swarm? Where could they find the source of the Hallowed? Velis gathered his courage and answered. The Hallowed were controlled from a structure at the center of the galaxy. The Council called it the Hollow Throne, a megastructure the size of a small moon. Intelligence suggested that a single consciousness directed the entire swarm from there. Destroy the throne, and the Hallowed might collapse. No fleet had ever reached it. Every attempt had been crushed long before getting close. Tay nodded slowly. He thanked the High Speaker for the information. Then he turned to his officers and ordered the fleet to prepare for a journey to the galactic core. The Deathworlders were going to war. The Deathworlder fleet pushed deeper into hollowed space. Each day brought new battles. Each battle revealed more about the strange creatures from Earth. Commander Torek had transferred to the Everest at Admiral Tay's invitation. The Pallid officer served as a liaison between the human fleet and what remained of the galactic military forces. But in truth, he had another purpose. He wanted to understand. For 30 years, Torek had studied military tactics across dozens of species. He thought he understood warfare. He thought he understood courage and fear and the limits of living beings. The humans destroyed everything he thought he knew. He watched them fight in conditions that would kill any other species. During the Battle of the Varus Corridor, a hollowed ambush damaged the life support systems on 3 human destroyers. The temperature inside the ships dropped far below freezing. Ice formed on the walls. Breath turned to fog. The pallid crew members on those ships required immediate evacuation. Exposure to such cold would kill them in minutes, but the humans simply put on thicker jackets and kept fighting. They operated their weapons with bare hands turning blue. They repaired damaged systems while their fingers lost feeling. One engineer worked for 6 hours in conditions that would have frozen a pallid solid. When the battle ended, the humans treated their frostbite and returned to duty the next day. Torek did not understand. He asked Dr. Shin Mina how this was possible. Mina explained that Earth's climate varied wildly. Humans had evolved to survive temperatures ranging from extreme heat to deadly cold. Their bodies could adapt to almost anything if given time. Even without time, they could push through conditions that would stop other species. Torek asked why they would choose to suffer like that. Why not evacuate to safer ships? Why not wait for proper environmental controls? Mina looked at him with something like confusion. Her shipmates were fighting, she said. How could she leave them? Torek had no answer. He observed other impossible things. Human ships pulled acceleration maneuvers that would liquefy the internal organs of most species. The crews simply grunted and held on, their bodies straining against forces that should have killed them. They called it pulling G's and spoke of it like a minor inconvenience. Human soldiers trained in the cargo bays during quiet hours between battles. Torek watched Sergeant Baysora lead her squad through exercises that looked more like organized violence than training. They hit each other with full force. Bones cracked, blood spilled. Sora herself took a strike to the face that broke her nose. She reset the bone herself, wiped the blood on her sleeve, and continued the session. Torek approached her afterward, struggling to find the right words. He asked if such brutal training was truly necessary. Sora considered the question seriously. She explained that Earth was a world where everything wanted to kill you. Predators hunted humans for food. Plants developed poisons to stop humans from eating them. Even tiny invisible creatures caused diseases that wiped out millions. To survive, humans had to become harder than their environment. The training was not cruelty, she said. It was love. She pushed her soldiers hard so they would be ready for anything. She hurt them in training so the enemy could not hurt them in battle. Every bruise was a lesson. Every broken bone was a teacher. Torek thought about the pallid approach to military training. They emphasized careful preparation, minimal risk, and extensive recovery periods. The idea of deliberately injuring soldiers during training would be considered criminal, yet he could not deny the results. Sora's squad fought like nothing he had ever seen. They feared nothing. They never hesitated. They had been forged in a fire that would have destroyed anyone else. He watched Lieutenant Park Day work on the bridge of the Everest. The young officer ran tactical analysis constantly, processing data streams that would overwhelm most computers. His eyes moved across screens in patterns too fast to follow. His hands entered commands before conscious thought seemed possible. Torek learned that Day had not slept more than 4 hours at any time since the fleet left Earth. He survived on a human stimulant called coffee and something he called willpower. When Torek expressed concern about the effects of sleep deprivation, Day simply shrugged. He would sleep when the war was over, he said. Until then, there was work to do. Torek had seen pallid officers collapse from exhaustion after 40 hours of duty. Day was approaching 200 hours with only brief naps. His performance had not decreased at all. The pallid commander found himself in a conversation with Admiral Tay one evening in the observation deck. They watched the stars stream past as the fleet traveled at faster than light speeds. Torek finally asked the question that had been building inside him since the first battle. How were the humans not afraid? Tay smiled at the question. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked Torek what he knew about Earth. Torek recited what every council species learned. Class 12, Death World, extreme gravity, violent weather, apex predators. Deadly pathogens. An environment so hostile that intelligent life should have been impossible. Tay nodded. All true, he said. But Torek had missed the important part. Humans evolved in that environment. They did not arrive there from somewhere safe. They grew up surrounded by death. Fear was not something they learned. It was written into their very blood from the first moment their ancestors crawled out of the oceans. Every human was afraid, Tay explained. They were afraid all the time. Fear was their constant companion, as natural as breathing. The difference was what they did with it. On Earth, fear could not make you freeze. If you froze, something would eat you. Fear could not make you run forever. Eventually, you had to turn and fight. So humans learned to work with their fear. They used it to sharpen their senses, to quicken their reflexes, to push beyond their limits. The Hollowed were terrifying, Tay admitted, but they were just another predator. Humans had been facing predators since the beginning of their species. This enemy was bigger and stranger than most. That did not change the fundamental equation. You saw the threat. You felt the fear. You kept moving anyway. Torek finally understood. The humans were not immune to terror. They had simply been baptized in it since birth. The galaxy's greatest horror was just another day at the office for creatures who had evolved on a world that actively tried to murder them every moment of every day. As if to prove the point, alarms suddenly blared across the ship. A massive Hollowed counterattack had been detected. The swarm was sending a fleet 5 times the size of anything previously encountered. They had recognized the human threat and decided to eliminate it. 3 human destroyers were lost in the first wave of fighting. Hundreds of crew members died in moments. Torek watched the tactical display with growing despair. The losses were unsustainable. The mission was doomed. Then he looked at the humans around him. They were sad. He could see grief in their eyes as names of the dead scrolled across screens. But they did not waver. They did not suggest retreat. They mourned their fallen comrades while continuing to fight, honoring the dead by refusing to quit. The battle raged for 18 hours. More ships fell. More humans died. The survivors adjusted tactics, adapted strategies, and kept pressing forward. When the swarm finally broke and fled, the Deathworlder fleet had lost 11 ships and over 1,000 crew members. It was the worst day since leaving Earth. Admiral Tay ordered a day of mourning. The fleet held memorial services. Crews shared stories of fallen friends. Tears were shed across 300 ships. And when the day ended, the fleet resumed its course toward the Hollow Throne. They carried their grief with them. They carried their fear. And they kept going, because that was what humans did. Torek watched them with something that had grown beyond respect. It might have been awe. The Hollow Throne filled the view screen like a tumor growing from the heart of the galaxy. It was larger than any structure Admiral Kang Tay had ever seen. The size of a small moon, it pulsed with dark energy that made sensors flicker and fail. Its surface crawled with billions of drones, so many that the throne seemed to breathe and shift like a living thing. Around it, a fleet of hollowed capital ships waited. These were not the small drones the humans had faced before. These were warships, each one the size of a human carrier, built from the consumed remains of 1,000 conquered species. The Deathworlder fleet had arrived at the end of their journey. 260 ships remained from the 300 that had left Earth. The rest had fallen in battles across the galaxy, their crews dead, their names added to the growing list of heroes. Tay gathered his senior officers in the command center. Captain Yoon Hana attended via hologram, her face still bearing scars from the last major engagement. Lieutenant Park Day stood beside the tactical display, dark circles under his eyes, but mind still sharp. Sergeant Bae Sora waited in silence. Her damaged armor replaced, but her wounds still healing. Dr. Shin Mina had come from the medical bay, where the injured from previous battles still filled every bed. Commander Torek stood with them, no longer a liaison, but something closer to a friend. Tay explained the plan. Intelligence gathered from destroyed, hollowed ships suggested that the swarm was controlled by a central consciousness, a queen that directed every drone from within the throne. The queen had been alive for longer than any galactic civilization. She had consumed countless species and absorbed their knowledge. She was the brain of the enemy. If she died, the swarm would collapse. Without her guidance, the drones would become mindless, easily destroyed. The war would end, but reaching her would require the greatest sacrifice the fleet had ever made. The plan had two parts. First, the main fleet would engage the hollowed forces in open battle. They would draw every enemy ship away from the throne, creating a gap in the defenses. This would be costly. Many ships would not survive. Second, while the battle raged, a strike team would infiltrate the throne itself. They would navigate through its nightmarish interior, find the Queen's chamber, and kill her. This mission was likely to be one way. The team might never return. Tay asked for volunteers. He did not have to wait long. Sergeant Sora stepped forward first. This was the mission she had trained her entire life for. Her soldiers followed without hesitation. 12 of the best warriors humanity had ever produced. Dr. Mina surprised everyone by volunteering as well. Sora would be wounded in the assault, she said calmly. Someone needed to keep her alive long enough to finish the job. Tay tried to refuse, but Mina simply smiled and said she had not asked for permission. The assault began at dawn, measured by the Everest's internal clock. Captain Hana led the diversionary fleet. The Iron Willow charged at the head of 150 warships, engines burning hot, weapons already firing. The hollowed swarm rose to meet them like a black wave crashing against rocks. The battle was chaos. Ships exploded in all directions. Human vessels rammed enemy drones when their weapons failed. Captains ordered suicidal maneuvers to protect damaged allies. Crews fought with everything they had, knowing that every second they held the line gave the strike team more time. The Iron Willow took catastrophic damage within the first hour. A hollowed capital ship had targeted Hana specifically, recognizing her as a leader. The enemy vessel carved through her hull, killing dozens of crew members and destroying half her weapons. Hana refused to withdraw. She ordered her surviving crew to seal the damaged sections and keep fighting. When her tactical officer died at his console, she took over his duties herself. When fire broke out on the bridge, she gave orders while the flames licked at her uniform. She held the line. Meanwhile, Sergeant Sora's dropship approached the hollow throne through the chaos. Lieutenant Day provided tactical support from the Everest, feeding them sensor data and finding gaps in the enemy formation. His voice was steady in their ears, a calm anchor in the storm of battle. The dropship crashed through a thin section of the throne's outer shell. The impact threw the team against their restraints, but everyone survived. They emerged into a corridor that seemed grown rather than built, walls of dark organic material that pulsed with sickly light. The air was toxic. The humans activated breathing filters and pressed on. Gravity shifted unpredictably, pulling them in different directions with each step. The throne was trying to disorient them, to make them lose their way. Sora had trained for this. She led her team through the maze using instinct and determination. When hollowed soldiers emerged from the walls to attack, her squad cut them down with brutal efficiency. They did not stop moving. They could not afford to stop. The journey took 3 hours. 3 hours of constant fighting, constant movement, constant death. One by one, Sora's soldiers fell. Some were killed by enemy attacks, others were consumed by the throne itself, pulled into walls that seemed to come alive and swallow them whole. By the time they reached the Queen's chamber, only Sora, Dr. Mina, and 2 soldiers remained. The chamber was vast, a cavern at the heart of the throne that stretched beyond sight. And at its center waited the Queen. She was enormous. Her body filled the space like a dark god resting on a throne of consumed civilizations. Countless limbs extended from her form, connected to the walls, to the ceiling, to systems that spread throughout the entire structure. She was the brain and the heart and the soul of the Hallowed, the oldest living thing in the galaxy. She spoke. Her voice entered their minds directly, bypassing ears and translators. She told them she had consumed 10,000 species. She had erased civilizations that existed before their ancestors crawled from the oceans. She had seen everything the galaxy had to offer, and none of it had ever threatened her. Until now. She recognized what the humans were. Deathworlders, products of an evolution so brutal that it had created something genuinely dangerous. She offered them a choice: join the swarm, be consumed willingly, and their strength would be added to hers. They would live forever within her consciousness. They would become part of something greater. Sora listened to the offer. She looked at the Queen, at the ancient monster who had killed billions. Then she pulled a grenade from her belt and threw it. The explosion wounded the Queen, but did not kill her. She screamed in their minds, a sound that drove the 2 remaining soldiers to their knees. Sora and Mina pushed through the pain and charged. What followed was the most desperate battle of Sora's life. The Queen's limbs struck at her from every direction. Her body was torn open, bones broken, blood spilling across the dark floor. Mina fought beside her, firing a weapon she had taken from a fallen soldier, buying time, keeping Sora alive. One of the remaining soldiers sacrificed himself to destroy a limb that was about to crush Sora. The other died shielding Mina from a blow that would have killed her instantly. In the end, only Sora and Mina remained. The sergeant could barely stand. Her left arm hung useless at her side. Her vision was blurred with blood. But she still held her combat knife, and she could still see the Queen's core pulsing with dark light. She ran. The Queen struck at her with everything she had left. Sora dodged what she could and took what she could not avoid. Her body was failing. Every step was agony. But she had been trained on Earth, the world that tried to kill you every moment of every day. She reached the core. She drove her blade into it with her one working arm, with all the strength she had left, with all the fury of a species that had clawed its way from the mud to the stars. The Queen screamed one final time. Then there was silence. Across the galaxy, hollowed drones went still. Ships stopped firing. The swarm that had consumed 17 star systems suddenly lost its guiding mind. In the command center of the Everest, Admiral Tay watched his sensors in disbelief. The enemy had stopped. The war was over. Dr. Mina called for extraction, her voice weak but clear. She had found Sora collapsed beside the Queen's core. Barely alive, still clutching her knife. The sergeant had killed a god. Now she just needed to survive long enough to tell the story. The silence after the Queen's death stretched across 1,000 worlds. On planets that had been under siege for months, hollowed drones fell from the sky like dead leaves. Swarm ships that had been moments from destroying entire civilizations suddenly drifted without purpose, empty vessels with no mind to guide them. The darkness that had been spreading across the galaxy simply stopped. Survivors emerged from shelters and bunkers. They looked up at skies that had been filled with horror and saw only stars. Many fell to their knees. Many wept. All of them wondered what had happened. The answer came slowly, spreading through communication networks that had been silent for too long. The humans had done it. The Deathworlders had killed the Queen. Aboard the Everest, Admiral Kang Tay ordered search and rescue operations to begin immediately. Dropships launched toward the Hollow Throne, now dark and lifeless, to retrieve the strike team survivors. They found Dr. Shin Mina first. She had dragged herself and Sergeant Bay Sora through kilometers of dead corridors, using emergency medical supplies to keep them both alive. When the rescue team reached them, Mina was unconscious from blood loss, her hands still pressed against a wound in Sora's chest. Sora was barely breathing. Her body had taken enough damage to kill most humans twice over. Her heart had stopped 3 times during the journey. Mina had restarted it each time through sheer determination. The medics loaded them onto the dropship and rushed them back to the Everest. For 3 days, the medical staff worked around the clock to save their lives. On the 4th day, Sora opened her eyes. She found herself in a bed in the medical bay, surrounded by soft light and quiet machines. Her body was wrapped in bandages and healing compounds. Everything hurt, but she was alive. Dr. Mina sat in a chair beside her bed, arm in a sling, face pale but smiling. Sora tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. Mina handed her water and waited. The sergeant's first words were a question. Did they win? Mina nodded. The Queen was dead. The swarm had collapsed. The war was over. Sora closed her eyes and let the words sink in. Then she asked about her soldiers, the 12 warriors who had followed her into the throne. Mina's smile faded. She told the truth. None of them had made it. Sora and Mina were the only survivors of the strike team. Sora was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered their names, one by one, a private memorial for the heroes who had given everything. Meanwhile, the galaxy began to rebuild. The Galactic Council convened for the first time since the invasion began. High Speaker Velis stood before the assembled representatives of surviving species. The chamber that had been nearly empty was now filled again, not with the same faces as before, but with new leaders who had risen during the crisis. Velis spoke of shame. He spoke of how the Council had imprisoned humanity out of fear, building walls around their system and praying they would never escape. He spoke of how that fear had been proven wrong in the most dramatic way possible. The Deathworlders had not come to conquer or destroy. They had come to save. Empress Letha of the Valerans was present despite her injuries. Her dominion had been the first to fall, and she had spent the war as a refugee, watching her people die by the billions. She owed the humans more than she could ever repay. When Admiral Tay entered the chamber, Letha rose from her seat. The room fell silent as she walked toward him on unsteady legs. Then, in a gesture her species reserved for the divine, she knelt before the human commander. Tay looked down at her with gentle eyes. He reached out his hand and helped her rise. The humans had not come for worship, he said. They had come because someone had called for help. That was all. That was enough. Commander Torek stood in the gallery, watching the scene unfold. He remembered his first reaction to the humans, the instinctive fear that had gripped him when he saw what Deathworlders could do. He remembered thinking of them as monsters barely contained. Now he understood the truth. Humans were not monsters. They were simply survivors, forged by a world that demanded everything from them. They had taken that strength and used it to protect strangers who had once rejected them. There was nothing monstrous about that. There was only courage. There was only compassion. The quarantine around the Sol system was officially lifted. Humanity was welcomed into the galactic community, not as a threat to be contained, but as allies to be treasured. Trade agreements were signed. Cultural exchanges began. Human ships would soon be seen in every corner of the galaxy. Captain Yoon Hana oversaw repairs to the Iron Willow in a station that had been built by species she had never met. Engineers from a dozen worlds worked alongside her human crew, learning from each other, building something new together. A young Valoran technician asked her if she would return to Earth now that the war was over. Hana looked through the station window at the vast spread of stars beyond. Earth had made them, she said. It had forged humanity in fire and blood and endless struggle. But the galaxy needed them now. There were worlds to rebuild, refugees to protect, a future to create. She smiled and returned to her work. The Iron Willow would fly again. Lieutenant Park Day finally slept. After months of minimal rest, after pushing his mind and body beyond all reasonable limits, he collapsed into a deep sleep that lasted for 20 hours. When he woke, he found messages of gratitude from species across the galaxy waiting for him. He read them quietly, said nothing, and went back to work. There was still much to do. Sergeant Sora recovered slowly. Her body healed, though she would carry scars for the rest of her life. When officers came to award her medals and honors, she refused them. She asked only one thing: that her fallen soldiers be remembered. A memorial was built on Earth, in a garden near the launch site where the Deathworlder fleet had first departed. 12 names were carved into stone, one for each member of the strike team who had given their lives. Sora visited it often, standing in silence before the monument, remembering the warriors she had led and lost. Dr. Mina established medical stations across the liberated systems. She taught alien doctors what she knew about human resilience, about the biology of Deathworlders, about the stubborn refusal to die that characterized her species. In return, she learned techniques and treatments from 100 different cultures. Medicine advanced more in those months than it had in centuries, and Admiral Tay stood on the bridge of the Everest, watching the galaxy spread before him. He thought about the signal that had started everything, a desperate cry from strangers who had spent centuries fearing his kind. They had called Earth because they had no other choice, and humanity had answered because it was the right thing to do. That was what it meant to be human. Not strength alone, though they had that. Not survival, though they had mastered that too. It was the choice to help when you did not have to. The choice to protect those who could not protect themselves. The choice to see beyond fear and find common ground. Humanity had crawled out of caves on a world that tried to kill them every single day. They had built civilizations and reached for the stars, and when the universe had screamed for help, they had listened. The galaxy would remember. They would remember the Deathworlders who came from a world of nightmares and became heroes. They would remember the soldiers who charged into hell and never came back. They would remember the doctors who healed wounds on 100 different worlds, the engineers who rebuilt what had been destroyed, the leaders who chose compassion over conquest. They would remember that when everything seemed lost, monsters from a death world had turned out to be the best friends the galaxy ever had. The stars shone bright outside the Everest's windows. Somewhere out there, the future was waiting, and humanity would face it the same way they had always faced everything. Together, unbroken, unafraid. The Deathworlders had answered the call. They would answer it again whenever they were needed. That was their promise. That was their gift. That was who they were.